And we are live, folks, here on the Sports Talk Nation, back here on YouTube. Michael Cohen, your host, along with a very great special guest, and that, of course, is John Pielli of the Pass Ball Show, which you can hear through his channel on Periscope. John, how you doing, man?
Hey, what's going on, Mike? Always a pleasure to talk to you.
So, John, we got a lot to discuss here. Baseball season is now here. Kind of opening up, well, not kind of. I am opening up the spring training capsule for this year, for 2018. And one of the things that I do during it, as you know from years past, I'll go through different teams throughout the course of the month. And to start off the month of March, I usually kind of go over what's happened so far in spring training and kind of take a look at what free agency has brought us. Now, this year, and we have discussed this ad nauseum, I know you've discussed it ad nauseum on your show, I on mine, about how slow free agency has been this year. We're in a situation, John, even to this point, as we're beginning March 1st, where the hot stove season still, in some ways, has not ended. We already saw Logan Morrison get signed by the Twins today. He rejected an offer from the Royals. The Royals then turn around, they sign Lucas Duda today. But there's still so many other big-time names that are out there in free agency that people haven't signed yet. Guys like, of course, Jake Arrieta, one of the top names that is out there right now. Is at 31 years old, a pitcher formerly of the Chicago Cubs. Lance Lynn, Mike Moustakas, Greg Holland, he's still out there too. Trevor Rosenthal, formerly of the Cardinals. A lot of big names. Now, we can go up and down throughout this list and take a look at a guy like a Jose Bautista who's 37 or a Jason Worth who's 38, but there are a lot of guys who are still in the primes of their career, and they can't seem to find a home. It just, for many reasons, maybe because of the contracts that they are demanding, the fact that a lot of teams just aren't willing to pay those contracts, which has been the case throughout the course of the offseason, and it continues to this point.
Yeah, Mike, I tell you, the biggest issue with that, I think, is what we've seen on the back end of teams. You got a couple teams that are going for it, maybe about 6 to 8, that really are looking at this season as a year to win a World Series championship, but then you got about 6 to 8 teams that have absolutely quit and aren't trying. And that has impacted the market of free agency probably more than anything. I mean, you got a handful of teams that could have been in it for somebody. And, when I'm talking about, let's say the Marlins or the Rays or the Pirates or the Royals or any other team you want to throw into this group, they usually had a more of an impact on the lesser players. And they don't even seem to be doing that this year, which is impacting the market. The teams that may consider themselves in a mix, whether it's for a wild card spot or a shot at a division title, are looking at their options and saying, hey, I could get a player that, may have been signed by an Oakland or Kansas City or Tampa Bay. And I could pay them less to do a job where, I would have spent $20 to $25 million on a big time player. So it's kind of been a rippling effect throughout the industry. And, it's a shame that some teams are, in that quote unquote tanking mode because, if you heard what, Adam Silver said the other day, in regards to the NBA, he took a stand and said, tanking is not going to be tolerated. Then how could you have another sport like Major League Baseball that is almost, I'm not saying they're condoning it, but it doesn't seem like they're really doing anything about the fact that teams are, seem to not be making an effort to give themselves any sort of competitive advantage on a baseball field. Yeah,
absolutely, and it's really kind of shocking the way things have transpired this year. You even have Scott Boras go out there and condemn a lot of the inactivity, for that matter, that's going on in Major League Baseball. Now, of course, it directly affects him with some of his free agents that are out there still looking for contracts, and it also goes into next year too. Now, I know we still got to get through this entire season, but the name that comes up, of course, is Bryce Harper. And while he won't discuss it, and he even told the media the other day, hey, if you guys bring up my contract, I'm going to walk out of this room. But it's a worthy discussion point because we have seen teams continue to show time after time for the last couple of years, whether it have been last offseason, whether it be this offseason, they just aren't willing to spend the big contracts. So the days of the A-Rod type of contract, the $300 million contract, $200 million contract, those days, and this is going to sound like a broken record for you, John, and for a lot of people out there, those days are over. And we've seen it time and time again. And it's going to be fascinating for me to see what precedent this offseason and this season set for the future here for baseball and the free agency?
Yeah, I tell you, the biggest thing that's having doing this is the luxury tax that's set in Major League Baseball. It is actually working like a salary cap, and I've stated it on my show a number of times. You know, for those that don't believe Major League Baseball will ever have a salary cap, well, they kind of have one right now. If you've seen what the Dodgers have done and what the Yankees have done, you know, teams that usually would have spent freely are now looking at that $197 million that is set before their tax and are using it as if it is a salary cap. You know, the penalties that exist in baseball for being over it 1 year and being over it the second year and the third year are kind of compounding as if it's a credit card. And, you know, these teams are looking at the penalties and in some cases having to deal with the penalties and have decided that that's not the best way to operate their business. So you've seen teams that normally would be in it for top free agents. And you can look at, you know, foreseeable needs that could be addressed by some of the free agents that are still out there now. And your big teams that are usually in on it are not. And that has changed the landscape as much as anything.
It really has. And let's just take a look. I bring up a couple of teams here that have been focusing on just value from that standpoint. You know, the Yankees, everyone was talking about what the Yankees did this offseason, going out and getting Giancarlo Stanton and inheriting that contract. But other than Stanton, they really were pretty quiet this offseason. Yes, they brought back CC Sabathia on a one-year deal, but there really wasn't that much activity. They tried to trade Jacoby Ellsbury. That did not work. They'll probably try to do that probably by July if they can. But there really weren't any real big-time signings by the Yankees as they were trying to stay under that $200 million threshold. And they didn't want to get the $197 million threshold. Even the Mets, and a lot of people pounded the Mets this offseason saying, oh, they're being cheap, oh, they're not going out there making big splashes. But when you consider what they paid for as far as value is concerned, it's not a bad thing what they did this year. You know, you get Jay Bruce for $13 million a year, and you compare that to what Milwaukee did for Lorenzo Cain. They're paying $3 million. They're paying $3 million more per year for 5 years. So even from that standpoint, while the Mets were quote unquote cheap, they paid for the value they were getting for this year. So that's something that I kind of note coming out of this offseason going into spring training.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, the Mets have been one of the more active teams this offseason. And I know, you know, being in this market where you get a lot of backlash from fans that are, they are the definition of the word, fanatics. But, you know, the Mets have addressed a number of needs and have been probably one of the more active teams this offseason. Are they spending, ridiculous money? No, but, I think they've spent money responsibly, addressed, first base, third base, outfield, a relief pitcher, and a starting pitcher. So, they put themselves in a position where they should very well be able to compete this year. And obviously compared to a lot of what we've been talking about, the fact that a lot of teams have been completely inactive, I think makes the Mets better because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I mean, now, I don't know if that means that it's going to mean playoffs for the Mets from that standpoint. We'll have to wait and see. There's still a lot of questions going on with what they're putting out there this year. But when you look at, they bring in a Todd Frazier, who is on a 2-year deal. I'm sure he was hoping for a lot more, even from the Yankees, for that matter, or anybody. Mets give him $8.5 million for the next 2 years, and he's going to be at third base. So they answer a third base problem that had been an issue for the last couple of years. I mean, the Mets had 8 players starting at third base last year, so they take care of that. I mentioned, of course, with Jay Bruce, they go out and they get Jason Vargas on a fairly inexpensive deal, $8 million a year, to be the 5th starter of this team if he beats out Zach Wheeler. And then they go out and get Adrian Gonzalez's insurance at first. So while these aren't names that are going to inspire Met fans to have dreams of winning a World Series this year, this is a team that's going to be competitive. It's a competitive rebuild in a lot of ways. This is a baseball team that's trying to fix its minor league system. There's been a lot of talk about how the minor league system has been depleted this season, going into this season. So while they're trying to fix that, they're also trying to be competitive on the field and put guys on the field that can give them a chance to be in the mix this year. That's really where they are right now.
No, so true. And I tell you, you compare it, and I hate to keep going to this, but compare it to, other teams that have decided, all right, we're going to build towards the future and not care about this year at all. I really do believe that the Mets have improved. You look at the National League East, you got the Phillies, who I think will be a little bit better. I like what they did, getting Carlos Santana, and, they got some younger players. Scott Kingery is going to come up and play second base for them this year. Obviously, you have Rhys Hoskins, what he did last year, coming out and hitting all those home runs. So I think they'll improve a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
The Braves are interesting because they were expected to take a step forward last year and didn't. They obviously have the number one prospect in all of Major League Baseball in Ronald Acuna, who's going to come up and play the outfield for them this year. And then you got the Marlins, who are the quitter of all quitters. So there's a lot of games to make up within that division. And I think the Mets have improved themselves to a point where they should be able to beat those teams. And, with that, should put them in a position where they're over 500. And, you see how some of the things come together. The key to them is going to obviously be their starting pitching.
Mm-hmm.
The guys that they have are healthy and pitching somewhat close to what they're capable of, then, that's another advantage for them. So, I think, some people have looked at the Mets and said, it doesn't look like it's going to be a big season for them. But, they're in a position where if a couple things break right for them, they certainly should be in the mix for one of the wild card spots.
They should be. Now, do you think there's a little bit of pressure here on the starting rotation, especially at first? It's only in the first week of spring training, so a lot of people need to curb the enthusiasm for that matter. But Steven Matz has a bad outing the other day, gives up 5 runs on 3 hits to the Astros, and it was really the Astros C team for that matter. None of their big players were in the lineup. And then you have Jacob deGrom with the back stiffness, and there's a question whether he'll be ready for opening day in a few weeks. So the Mets are right away coming out of the gate here in spring training. A couple of injuries to be worried about here, and a couple of slow performances to be worried about here to start things off. What are your thoughts here on the rotation?
Well, listen, I like it on paper, and I think it's easy to say, if everybody is healthy, then, their rotation can rank up amongst anybody in baseball. But, you go back to last year and the fact that only Jacob deGrom, made anywhere close to 30 starts.
Mm-hmm.
The next, I think the next amount of innings pitched was through Robert Gesellman and then Rafael Montero. Mm-hmm. Certainly not the way you would have planned it coming into the last season. Listen, a guy like Steven Matz is always going to be concerned. He's a guy that since he made his major league debut has not been able to stay on the field. There's always something going, whether it's in his elbow or his shoulder or it's something between the ears. It always seems like there is something that is bothering him. He went out there last year and looked like he tried to put that stuff aside, saying, hey, I'm just going to go pitch and forget about how I feel. And then it turns out he did have a problem with his arm that costed him the rest of the season. By the way, he was pitching terribly. So, he's always going to be my biggest concern. I'm interested in a guy like Zach Wheeler because I think, maybe that extra year that he's had since his Tommy John surgery could put him in a position where his arm may be feeling better. He may be able to air it out a little better. I don't know exactly what his role with the Mets is going to be best suited for, whether it's going to be a starter or as a long reliever or maybe even as a short reliever. But I'm anxious to see, I think he could be a very, very important wild card for them this year because if, his arm strength is back and he's able to throw the ball as well as he did prior to his Tommy John surgery, he's not even one of the big 3 or the big 4 in that rotation.
Yeah.
And I think the depth that they have, assuming that everybody's healthy, is something that you could kind of lay your hat on as far as being a very positive thing to look forward to. But listen, spring training has started. There's going to be some, aches and pains. There's going to be a couple guys that you're not going to expect to get hurt or have to deal with certain issues. But, I think the Mets did address that in regards to depth. They got about 7 or 8 or maybe 9 pitchers. And, if you heard Mickey Callaway talk about how, he expects to need to go through 10, 11, maybe 12 starting pitchers to get through the course of the season. I think the Mets are well equipped to get through and maybe handle a couple injuries.
I think it also opens the door here for guys like Seth Lugo, who had a brilliant outing. His first outing looked really sharp on the hill. His first time out this spring. Also, Robert Gesellman. I mean, he's been kind of the forgotten guy. A lot of people were not happy with the way he performed last year, and has an opportunity to prove himself if, let's just say, a Matz or a Wheeler should fall off here in spring training to grab a spot. I mean, that's really what this is all about. It's, in my mind, it's kind of an open competition for one spot, and you have about 4 or 5 guys kind of competing for that. Now, the common thought here is that you're going to have Vargas make the rotation. We haven't seen him pitch yet, but the common thought is he'll be in the rotation as the 5th starter. What is that? And if Matz is going to be the 4th starter, where does that put Wheeler? Now he has never been a guy who's come out of the bullpen in his career ever at any level. So that would be the one issue that would concern me with Zach Wheeler. How does he recover? If he's going to have to come in, pitch 2 innings on a Sunday afternoon, and then come back on a Monday night and have to pitch an inning or get a batter, can his arm recover? That's been the big question with him.
Well, I think one of the things that's out, and I'm kind of impressed with a lot of the things that I hear out of Mickey Callaway.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been given a lot of credit for what he did in Cleveland, but his knowledge of a pitching staff is kind of standing out in a lot of the comments and the things he's talking about. And he really does seem to have a plan in regards to how he wants to use his pitchers. The one thing that stood out that he mentioned about wanting to have 3 pitchers that are going to be part of the bullpen, that are going to be starter type of pitchers, mm-hmm. that are going to be expected to maybe come in a game in a 4th inning or the 5th inning and may pitch 2 or 3 innings, but also have the rest that's needed for, let's say, a starter. So if Zach Wheeler is one of those guys, let's say he's coming in there pitching 2 innings, then has the next 2 days off, you're not worried so much on how Zach Wheeler is going to pitch on back-to-back days, because that might not even be an option. So I do like the way that at least the plan is to carry maybe 2 or 3 pitchers that are starters type of pitchers, mm-hmm. and not use that and use them in a typical reliever way, as we commonly know the relief position to be a guy that pitches 1 inning and could be available the next day. Mm-hmm. It's kind of an extension of the starting rotation, and maybe out of that, the cream could rise to the top, and you'll have 5 starters that you'll know, without a doubt, those are the 5 best starters on the team.
Yeah, now keep in mind, Mickey Callaway has said numerous times he is not going to designate a closer. Now, we all assume that Jurius Familia is going to see the majority of opportunities to close games out. He has the most experience, but that does not mean we can't see an A.J. Ramos, we can't see an Anthony Swarzak, or even a Jerry Blevins, even though he's probably better off in the 8th inning role for that matter. There are a lot of opportunities for them to go out there and mix and match. That's the opportunity that Callaway has created here by opening up the competition, maybe even giving the chance for a starter, someone who has fallen out of the rotation, to get an opportunity to be in the bullpen, maybe in late relief. And who knows, maybe even as a closer at some point.
Yeah, and it also creates a little bit of competition within the team. Some friendly competition where guys are kind of vying for certain spots, but also understand that they have a place on the team. Somebody, let's say a Matt Harvey, could start the season as a starter, but may end up going to the bullpen. Imagine Matt Harvey as the Mets closer. I kind of think of a couple of years ago when Hunter Mejia was the Mets' 5th starter, and he had an issue getting through the 4th or 5th inning. His first 3 innings were solid, but the 2nd and 3rd time through the batting order, he seemed to not be the same. Mm-hmm. The Mets kind of came to him and said, "Listen, we're going to put you in the bullpen." And I don't know if it was a negotiation between him and the Mets, but they decided, "Hey, you're going to be in the bullpen and be our closer." Mm-hmm. Matt Harvey may not want to do that right now, but it's something that imagine Matt Harvey pitching the 9th inning, giving 95 to 98 with the movement that he has on his pitches. That may set him up for his next contract in baseball better than trying to slump through another season as a starter when the last 2 years have been terrible for him.
I've always felt that if you are a starting pitcher, and whether you're struggling, you're coming back from an injury, and you kind of need to reinvent yourself, you want to be a starting pitcher. That's obvious. That's the first goal. But if you are forced to go into a bullpen, embrace it. And there is, I keep going back to John Smoltz. And now that he's a broadcaster, I hope these guys go to him and talk to him and say, "Hey, how did you do it?" Here was a guy who was one of the more dominant starting pitchers in the game. He really, in his prime, was one of the top starting pitchers in baseball in the 90s, in John Smoltz. And then he goes into the bullpen, coming back from Tommy John surgery, and just reinvents himself as a dominant closer. Now, who knows? Maybe a Matt Harvey, like you just mentioned, can go into the bullpen one day if his struggles continue in the rotation, and be that kind of guy for the Mets this year or whoever going forward. Maybe reinvent himself and eventually get back into the rotation at some point down the road. But it's something that I know a lot of pitchers don't like to do, but I wish that they would embrace more just the idea of, it's not the worst thing in the world if I'm given the 9th inning. That has to be a train of thought for pitchers.
Yeah, you've seen a lot of precedents set with it. A guy like Andrew Miller, and we look at him as a prototypical closer or a late reliever, but he was a number 1 draft pick, a guy that was expected to be an ace, a number 1 starter in a rotation. And you obviously see the tools that he has, and he's kind of reinventing the leading relief pitcher by being able to pitch multiple innings. And I think a lot of guys can pick up off of that. And, Mickey Callaway, obviously using him along with Terry Francona in Cleveland, I think there's a lot of things that, he could take with him in regards to the Mets to maybe use some of the pitchers in a similar way. And maybe grab, one of these guys who we think of as a fifth starter or bust and get a lot more out of them and certainly help the Mets win games and put themselves in a position where their bullpen may turn out to be a lot deeper than we think it is right now.
Absolutely. I mean, before we move on to some of the other discussions here, what are your thoughts just from seeing a couple of games here so far in spring training? Just what are your thoughts from what you've seen from that so far?
Well, it's hard to get a lot out of it right away because, guys are kind of just going through the motions. The guys that have spots on the roster are just getting their couple at bats or, throwing a couple innings. But, I think the Mets have, a little more depth than was perceived, after the off season. I think they should be able to fill out a roster pretty good. We spent a lot of time talking about the pitching. I think the pitching, as long as the guys stay healthy, should come around. You're going to get 5 starters. You're probably going to need more than 5 starters to get through the season. But you may be able to find a gem or two that's going to be able to excel in a relief role that we're not even thinking about right now. In regards to the position players, obviously, Michael being out is going to set the Mets up to where you just hope when Michael Conforto comes back, he can be close to the player that he was last year. The injury with his shoulder is something that could reoccur at any time. And certainly he's going to have a psychological effect on him, when he goes out there. He can't go out there and swing for the fences and not think of the possibility of something like that happening again. So you may get a little bit of a diminished player because of that. So that's why I thought the signing of Jay Bruce was very important. Adding Todd Frazier, gives some offense, to the lineup, kind of lengthens it a little bit. And, I think the Mets, are in a good position. But I just think right now, watching a couple games, it's hard to get a lot out of and say, hey, this is going to be exactly the way it is. I hope the guys stay healthy, but, outside of that, listen, I think they have a decent baseball team, a team that, if everything comes together, they certainly can win 85 to 90 games this year.
Absolutely. Now, staying in the division here, there's been a lot of rumors swirling around here over the last 24 hours or so that the Washington Nationals have a strong interest in Jake Arrieta. Now, I know the Phillies have also been linked to Arrieta, but now there's a recent rumor that the Nationals may be in on him as well. Now, just the thought of Jake Arrieta in that rotation, you already have Scherzer there, Strasburg, Gonzalez, Roark. That is frightening. I mean, this is a Nationals team that is really, they really have no choice. This is now or never. And for Dave Martinez, who's in his first year, man, he's under the microscope right now, especially with the way they change things up in Washington on a yearly basis, it seems like. But with Harper, who's in his walk year, you got Daniel Murphy in a walk year. They need to go for it now. This is a now team. So if they go out there and get Jake Arrieta, they'll be even tougher to beat, not just in this division, but also in the National League.
No, I agree. I think, obviously you think of Arrieta with Scherzer and with Strasburg in that rotation. I mean, that's, you can't name another top 3 in baseball that would be, they'll be able to compete with that. So, obviously it would make sense if the Nationals could somehow work out a deal. Obviously, Scott Boras was ties to the organization, and the fact that he represents several players that are on that current roster, could give the Nationals a little bit of an in. But, the thing that concerns me about the Nationals is the fact that they do operate at sort of a budget that not a lot of people talk about. If you look at a lot of the contracts that they've signed players to, there's been a lot of deferred payments. There's been a lot of, contracts that you look at the total dollar amount and you say, all right, that's a good contract, but, Max Scherzer is getting paid over 14 years as opposed to 7 years. So they've done a lot of finagling, which is hiding the bigger issue, the fact that, they may not be as financially solvent as, we look at them and just assume they are because of the players that they have and the contracts that they have on that roster. So, an Arrieta deal, which I think could be done, I think maybe along the creative sense in, trying to put something together that is good for the Nationals, but also good enough that Jake Arrieta will be willing to accept.
Yeah, and not to mention, the Nationals only spent $23 million this offseason, or $32 million this offseason. So it's not like they're spending a whole heck of a lot of money. And their biggest contract went to Kitzner for $10 million over 2 years. They signed Howie Kendrick for $3.5 million over for 2 years. So they weren't spending a lot of big bucks, just like a lot of people, for that matter, on big free agents. So do they have the payroll flexibility? I'm sure they do, but we'll see what kind of contract that area is going to get. His demands have been have been out there. I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, John. He's been kind of pushing that $100 million contract, if I'm correct, right? That's what he was hoping for at one point.
Yeah. Yeah, if you heard Scott Boras. Scott Boras has basically made him out to be, something better than a Yu Darvish, and is still kind of pushing, way over $100 million. And I don't know if it's something that is feasible now. I don't know if it's Scott Boras just being, Scott Boras trying to set the market up, but he views Jake Arrieta as, painted a picture that Jake Arrieta is that, elite pitcher. He is Clayton Kershaw. He is Chris Sale. And obviously that hasn't worked up to this point. So, I wonder where the happy medium is. What is Scott Boras and Jake Arrieta willing to accept in regards to a shorter term deal, which looks like the most feasible thing at this point? Would Scott Boras, for the market standpoint and maybe, impact clients down the road, encourage Jake Arrieta to hold out and maybe not sign a deal until he gets something closer to what he's looking for? Or, is he willing to, get more creative and do something that, involves more of a shorter term deal, or maybe a deal that involves, multiple opt-out clauses or something like that, that's more front loaded and back loaded, which seems to be where a lot of teams are going for now. But, I think it's something that's going to have to be creative to have something happen in the short term. Or, maybe the decision is to hold out until you get that absolute deal that, Scott Boras feels that Jake Arrieta is worth.
And that kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier about the guys who are still available. Like, all the big names that are still out there. How much longer do these guys want to wait for contracts? And because these teams don't seem to be in a rush to sign anybody. They're willing to go out there, and if they have to play some of their younger guys, they're willing to do that. If they're willing to play the guys that they have already on the roster and they're paying, they'll do that. So you have guys who are like a Mike Moustakas, like a Arrieta, who we just talked about, like a Lance Lynn. I mean, these are good players. They're still in their prime. I mean, at some point, you would think that they're going to tell their agent, hey, look, I got to get into a camp. I got to get somewhere, because in a couple of weeks, if they don't sign anywhere, or even in a week for that matter, they don't sign anywhere, now they're even further behind. Now they're 2-3 weeks behind everybody else as far as getting ready for the season.
And I tell you, the thing that stands out is today's date, the fact that it is March 1st.
Yeah.
And I think March 1st, as it hits, is going to start to hit a lot of these players in their heads to where they start to think, wow, spring training has started. I'm on this camp with just these random players just trying to get a workout. And there's a chance the baseball season might start without me having a job. Mm-hmm. So I do think that's an aspect that has to be talked about. And, whether it's all the players or maybe one player, decides that really is an issue, that could expedite things. That could, cause a conversation between the player and the agent saying, listen, what is out there for me? What is the best offer right now? I want to get out to do, what my God-given talents have showed that I could do, and that's play baseball. Mm-hmm. A lot of these players, just about all of them that are out there, especially the high-profile players, have, either never been in a situation like this or have not tested free agency at all. Mm-hmm. So if this is their first experience of what free agency is like, yeah, you know what? They're going to be chomping at the bit to want to play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And, this kind of goes into what has been talked about at times this offseason about the Players Union and about them trying to get involved, try to expedite some of these moves, and, concerns with the owners and, of course, the players as well. So this is now leading to what's going to be, at some point down the road, a pretty contentious, I would imagine, negotiation process for the next bargaining agreement, when you have all these guys who are prime players just sitting out there, and these teams just don't want to spend the money. So it's leading to a situation that down the road could be problematic. Really could be.
Yeah, the Yeah, the next collective bargaining agreement is going to be I don't know, it's going to be a hoot, at the very least, to put it the most kindly as possible. Mm-hmm. I mean, you got some tension that's growing on both sides. You have, the Players Association and agents that are wondering why. Baseball teams have decided that, the best way to go forth is to not compete and not put themselves in the market to get the best players to play for their team. You got the owners that are looking at this luxury tax and they are operating as if it is a salary cap. And, the Players Association is going to probably want to do away with it if they possibly can, or at least negotiate something that isn't as hard, on the owners to, where they've drawn the line to say that they're not going to go over a certain amount of dollars. So I think the tension that exists, unfortunately, because we've been very lucky to have so many years of labor peace in regards to Major League Baseball. It's something that doesn't seem like it's going to end well. There's going to have to be a lot of compromise on both sides to get both sides a little bit closer to avoiding some sort of work stoppage in the year 2020.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also the pace of play rules that have been discussed, I think it's going to be a big part of that. And I mean, John, just take a look at what we're looking at right now with baseball. You got a whole bunch of rule changes that they're considering implementing. They thought about putting in the 20-second pitch clock. They decided not to do that this year. Instead, now they have limitations on the number of times that a manager or a pitching coach can visit the mound. Now it's down to 6 times, and if you can't go over 6 times in visits to the mound. So now teams have to get extra creative in how they get their signals out to their pitchers or communicate to their pitchers in games. It's crazy. And now there's also the talk about possibly having a random order, if you will, of hitters coming up in the 9th inning, basically taking the idea of having a closer come in and shut the game down basically out of the equation. Where you're going to have a closer come in and face 3 of the top hitters in someone's lineup is absolutely ludicrous, and random hitters for that matter. This isn't like 3, 4, 5. You can bring up your best hitters, whoever you want, into that mix. It's crazy. I mean, all these kind of proposals that I've been hearing about coming from whether it be the commissioner or whether it be other people upstairs in Major League Baseball, just baffles my mind. Just the idea that you have to take away the tension of the 9th inning, or the idea of, basically hurting the other team's closer, for that matter, by putting up 3 straight power hitters in a row as if it's a home run derby in the 9th inning, just doesn't make any sense to me. It really doesn't.
I've had a difficulty understanding, Mike, what is the motive of this? In other words, like what is the base of which they're looking to appease? Mm-hmm. And you could say, maybe it's the new generation, the millennials, the technology that we have today that's all at our fingertips. But, it's almost like it's a change that's going on in the world. And it's not just impacting Major League Baseball, it's impacting all sports. You have fantasy sports, you have, so many different avenues for people to view a game or get an idea of what's going on in a game. And it seems like Major League Baseball is trying to go back, 50, 60 years and get the fans to show up at the stadium and sit in their seat. That being said, we've seen 20 years plus of new stadiums which are, enhancing the fan experience and basically doing everything possible to keep the fan out of their seat, paying attention to the action. So I almost see like a little, a little bit of, the typical politician talking out of both sides of their mouth. What exactly is it that you're looking for or you want to do? You want to bring more fans in the stadium. That's great. You've done that by expanding all the amenities that exist. The clubs, go to Citi Field and your kid gets to hit a ball off the tee. Everything possible to keep the fan out of their seats. But on the other side, they're saying, hey, we want to make sure that the fans engaged in the experience, make sure the game is shorter and more entertaining. So, it just seems like I'm having a hard time understanding exactly what their motive is. What is their end result that they're looking to accomplish with all this?
Yeah, I don't know. And they want to speed the games up at the same time. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me at all. Now, to me, yes, would I like if you are a parent and you are at a Wednesday ball game at 7:00 at night and the game's going 3.5 hours and it's 10:30 and got to work the next morning? Okay, I can understand that. You want to get back to the house. Like, I totally get that. But you know what? For the rest of the fans, and you take a look at let's just say it's a postseason game like we saw in the World Series, Game 5. That game was epic. I mean, it was going on forever. Lead changes galore. Game went on for like 4 or 5 hours. I mean, it was phenomenal. Phenomenal theater. No one cared that the game was going on for 4 to 5 hours. In fact, I remember people on Twitter saying, "Oh my God, I wish this game would keep going." They wanted it to go on for another 4 or 5 hours. That's how good that game was. So why would you want to all of a sudden start to cut down on what has made baseball so great, and that is just the individual effort that is put out there on the field, the human element. I mean, we already seen the human element taken out of the game with instant replay, which has really stretched out these games incredibly long. I mean, you talk about wanting to cut the games down short. Get rid of these ridiculous instant replay rules where you're reviewing not just home runs, but basically anything and everything for that matter. It's crazy. I mean, we see that even in the NFL for that matter. Get rid of that. Really, it's time to bring the human. Just leave the human element alone in the games. Really, in my mind.
Well, I'll tell you. I'll throw one suggestion out there. You let me know what you think.
Sure.
We talk about the challenge rule, instant replay as it exists in Major League Baseball, and we've also seen managers who have essentially had their jobs taken away from them as far as the strategy, the in-game decisions. How about you give that decision to the manager to make immediately? In other words, if there's a call that they don't like, if it's a call that in a normal day when baseball, didn't have instant replay, that manager was going to run out there to first base and argue with that umpire. That they have basically that amount of time to make a decision of whether they're going to challenge their ruling on the field. That adds to the strategy of the game. You'll find that some managers are good at noticing what should be reviewed right away.
Right.
And you're taking away the delay that exists when you got the guy up in the box that's looking at the replay 4 or 5 times to determine whether it's close enough to challenge or not. Make that manager accountable. Make him, have to be on his toes, have to be paying attention to the action, have to do, the only part of his job that's really left, since all the decisions are being made for him, by the front office and the analytics staff already. That'll speed the game up. You have a decision, all right, bam, right there, the play just happened. Would I argue, if there was no instant replay? All right, if I wouldn't, then let it go. But you know what? Let me make that challenge right away, that distinction that, we're going to challenge the ruling on the field immediately. Maybe give the manager another challenge or two, because it's going to be a quicker process. But, make the manager make that decision immediately instead of having to wait or rely on somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, I could certainly understand that, but, the problem is everything's now done by video. So they're sitting there, they're calling someone downstairs in the clubhouse saying, "Hey, did you see that play? Was he out at first base?" And it just delays it even more. So I totally understand what you're saying. If you have doubts about it, go right away and challenge it. What's the difference? But at the same time, you're still now taking a lot of time to actually do the review. So that's why I'm kind of against instant replay altogether. If it's a home run call, like what we saw in the playoffs last year, where the Astros had that home run against the Yankees, Aaron Judge thought that the kid interfered with the baseball. Okay, I can certainly understand having instant replay for plays like that. But for everything else, I just think enough. Let the human element decide, as it has always done in baseball, what the play is. Whether it be a very close play at first base, whether someone was inside or outside the invisible line for that matter, going from first to second or second to third. Outside of plays at home plate or home runs, I just don't see a need for instant replay in my mind. I just don't.
No, listen, I think it's a valid point. Unfortunately, we are in the technology stage, so baseball, just like other sports, are taking advantage of the ability to make the calls right. And think about it. I mean, instant replay is in there for what reason? The number one reason is to make sure the calls are right on the field. Now, we could do stuff in regards to, having, replay available, let's say, in all stadiums as opposed to having to go to one central office. Maybe there is, an umpire and a replay official that's in every stadium that's there to, make the decisions, make the calls, study whatever tape that they have and come to a decision quicker. I think that is stuff that could improve over time, but unfortunately, with the replay, it's going to cause a delay to the game in some sort. And we have to understand, number one, that, the technology is there to help. That's the reason. It's not there to delay the game. It's to make sure that the calls are right. So in the cases of controversial plays that, there's things that you have to see, look a little more in detail, it's going to cause a little bit of a delay to the game. But, I just think there's too many bright minds in this sport and, in all sports. You look at, the analytics staff, the fact that you got people that are Harvard and Yale graduates that know nothing about baseball but know numbers and tendencies and, theorems and stuff like that. You use all the advantages that you can to make the game better. And I think with these bright minds, which we're dealing with people with high IQs, we could come up with a way to shorten the process and maybe not make the games delayed as much as they've been over the last several years.
Yeah, absolutely. But they've got to figure a way to get this right. They really do. We're here with John Pielli on the Open Mic program. Of course, John hosts the Past Poll show daily at 6 o'clock, and he'll be getting ready for that in just a little bit. He's going to have a great guest today. He's going to have Jerry Eisenberg, formerly of the Star Ledger, on his podcast today. Of course, I will be down in spring training next week with the Mets, so I'll be covering that. So we got that coming up. So a lot of good things coming up for both of our programs. But last thing, who do you think, and I know this is kind of a ridiculous phrase to say anyway, who won the offseason, but going into the season, of teams that have made some of the bigger moves this offseason, which teams do you think are now on the radar as teams that are to watch for this year?
Well, certainly, you can't have this conversation without mentioning the Yankees.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they built a lot in regards to getting guys like Stanton and Sanchez, up to where they are some of the top power hitters of the game. You add Stanton to that mix, the team's going to score a ton of runs. And I think the starting pitching is a little bit underrated too. Sonny Gray was a guy they acquired last year, and they made that trade, and nobody really said anything about it. Sonny Gray a couple of years ago was one of the top 5 or 10 starting pitchers in all of Major League Baseball. I know he had to deal with some injuries, but he pitched pretty well for the Yankees after they acquired him. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, every game that he was involved in was like a 3-2 or a 2-1 game, and the Yankees lost some of them. But I look at from a depth perspective, what the Yankees have offensively and in their bullpen. I think they're going to be a lot better this year. The Houston Astros won the World Series, and they traded for Garrett Cole. So, that's a team that, was the best in baseball. Looks like they've gotten even a little bit better. So it's, I look at those two teams in the American League, the National League. I like, the Cubs. If you look at their starting rotation 1 through 5 is very solid. Darvish is a great addition, and then Tyler Chatwood. Very quietly, you can go out there and win 13 to 16 games without anybody knowing about it. Mm-hmm. They still got Jose Quintana. They still got Lester and Hendricks there. So they're going to be a tough team to beat. And what you mentioned before, I look at the Nationals not just from a standpoint of the talent that they have on their team, but the point that you made as far as everything riding on this season. Mm-hmm. This being the year where essentially things will look a lot different next year if they don't get it done now. There's a sense of urgency that exists from that front office to that ownership to the coaching staff to the veteran players on that team. But I think the Nationals may be better just because of that. Everything is riding on what they do this season because that team's going to look a lot different next year. Yeah. So I look at the Nationals and I say this may very well be the year where they put it all together and make their run, to win a World Series championship.
Yeah, I agree. That's a great point right there on the Nationals. This is it for them. I agree with you on the Yankees. I mean, I think they're going to be exciting to watch, especially offensively with those two big guys in the middle of the lineup with Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton. Kind of reminds you a little bit of the days of Mantle and Maris back in the early '60s, late '50s, early '60s, when you had those guys chasing big-time home run numbers on an annual basis, especially in 1961. So that's what that's kind of like right now for them. But not only outside those two guys, but they just have a lot of thunder all over the place with Greg Bird if he's healthy, Gary Sanchez if he's healthy. So with that whole lineup together, Didi Gregorius, it's going to be tough for a lot of teams in the American League to go up against that. Now, the only team that is really built to face them is obviously Houston. I mean, they still got a lot of the core guys that were part of that World Series team. I thought getting Garrett Cole was a good addition for them. It gives them a nice number 3 starter to go behind Keuchel and Verlander. So they're the one team. You want to throw Cleveland in there too, you can, but they're the one team that was going to give the Yankees the biggest trouble is Houston. And the other team that kind of is a team to watch out for is going to be Milwaukee because they go out there, they get Christian Yelich in a trade with Miami. They signed Lorenzo Cain, so they've got those two guys to go along with an aging Ryan Braun, Eric Thames coming off of a big year. They're going to be good offensively. Now, I have concerns about the Brewers' pitching staff. I don't think the Brewers' pitching staff is as good or as deep as, let's just say, the Chicago Cubs who in that division. So it's going to be those two teams out of the Central, and I guess another team I want to watch is going to be San Francisco, going out there, getting Evan Longoria, adding him on third base, giving them a little more pop there. Andrew McCutchen as well in a one-year deal. So that's going to be fascinating to see how the Giants, coming off of a bad year, healthier this year with Bumgarner and Cueto in the top of the rotation, to see if the Giants can rebound out west. So those are a couple of big teams to watch this year, Milwaukee and San Francisco.
Yeah, I tell you, one thing that stands out to me as opposed to different seasons, and it's just like myself, you've covered the last 5 or 6 baseball seasons and kind of done previews as the seasons have started.
Yeah.
And this is the season that seems to me to be a lot more top heavy than other years. And in most years we could talk about, let's say, this team's a sleeper team or that team could be a sleeper team. You got about, 7, 8 teams that you expect to compete for a World Series championship. You got about 7 or 8 teams that have quit. And there's a lot of middle ground. And it's just a lot that, doesn't, fascinate, us as baseball, analysts, looking at it to say, hey, can this team, make that next step? It may happen, but it just seems like the top teams look like they're going to dominate, and there aren't as many sleeper teams that can compete with the likes of, let's say in the National League, the Nationals and the Cubs and the Dodgers, in the American League, the Yankees and the Astros and the Indians. It just seems like the best teams are up there, and it's almost like we're picking our National League and American League championship series when the seasons are started. It's something that I don't remember feeling coming into any baseball season in recent memory.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, there are a lot of teams that are mediocre. I mean, even teams that right now you would consider. I mean, take a look at the Mets again. Last time on the Mets here, but they got a chance because the National League is so wide open. Outside of those 3 teams you mentioned, the Dodgers, the Cubs, and the Nationals, the wild card is wide open. So I mean, who would ever thought that you go into March 1st and you're spending time talking about wild card positioning in both leagues? I mean, usually we're saying, well, this team's going to be a sleeper; it's going to win the division. Everyone has like different division winners. This is all about the wild card right now. It's crazy. It really is, and it's March 1st.
Yeah, and you know what? You were looking at the wild card to, let's say, play one game and maybe win it and get, bounced by that top team that we're looking and we're seeing is so, unbeatable. So it's, the wild card, it might be a little extension to that team's postseason, but we're not looking at any of these teams as legitimate World Series contenders.
Yeah, not at all. So it's gonna be fascinating, John. It really is. It's gonna be a fun season. It's odd that it's kind of starting early, starting on March 29th. Kind of doesn't feel right. It feels like it should start April 1st, but that's just the way the schedule's rolling out this year. We'll see how this thing goes. Obviously, we're going to do we'll have a lot of shows here to do before we get the season started, so you and I will be back at some point in the next couple of weeks to do some stuff, and we'll go from there. Now, I wish you luck tonight. You got a big interview tonight.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, man. There's a lot of different things we can cover in the world of sports with a guy that obviously is a man that has seen a lot of sports and a lot of sports history in his time. And don't forget, you'll be part of my show tomorrow. So looking forward to getting into a lot of things going on in the world of sports with you and kind of switching roles a little bit.
Absolutely. So it's folks, tomorrow evening, I will be with John 6:00 on his channel on Periscope. But we'll be doing a lot of talk on sports as well. So John, looking forward to it.
Yeah, definitely, Mike. Always a pleasure talking to you. We'll definitely, we look forward to an upcoming baseball season, and a lot may happen before opening day, especially with all those free agents that are still out there.
Absolutely, man. All right, take care. I'll talk to you tomorrow, man.
All right, take it easy, Mike.
Take care. Folks, that's John Pielli of the Passball Show. Again, I will be on with him tomorrow. Now, just again to go over the itinerary, for that matter, as we have spring training coming up. I'll be flying down to Florida on Sunday. And then on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I'll be down at Port St. Lucie at First State of Field for the New York Mets, covering the games. I'll be covering for the amazing clubhouse, as well as this program right here on the Sports Talk Nation. Now, it'll be a little bit different. It won't exactly be radio segments, but we will be actual video. So it'll be kind of like a travel vlog slash recaps, game recaps, and that's what we'll do. We'll get some images of the games. We're going to try on Wednesday to get a couple of players. We're going to do the best we can to do that. If we get some one-on-ones, which we're going to ask for, then fantastic. We're going to put those on the channel. If we can't, but we're able to mingle around and get some comments after the game, with other members of the media during press conferences, we'll get that. We'll do whatever we can when we get down there. We'll figure it out when it happens. So remember to follow us right here on the social media. Facebook.com/OpenMicProgram, at OpenMicNJ on Twitter, and on the Sports Talk Nation right here on YouTube. Talk to you next time.